Breastfeeding can be so hard and there is so much misinformation about it. It can be so confusing. Today I want to share with you my top 10 breastfeeding tips for new moms. These are the things that will help you get off to a good start with breastfeeding. Hi Mama, welcome to my channel, Breastfeeding Confidential, where I talk about all things breastfeeding. My name is Andrea Tran. I'm a registered nurse and a lactation consultant, an IBCLC, and I've been helping moms and babies breastfeed for over 26 years, and I want to help you too. If you're a breastfeeding mom and you want information, tips, and support, be sure and hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of my helpful videos. I'm going to share my top 10 tips for getting breastfeeding established, and make sure that you stay to the end so that you can find out how to get access to my free Breastfeeding Myths course. Tip number 1, do skin to skin. Do it early and do it often. Ideally, you want to do it right after birth. As soon as the baby's born, they'll put the baby up on your tummy, dry the baby off, and keep your baby there for as long as you can. If for some reason you can't do skin to skin right after birth, then do it as soon as you can. Continue to do skin to skin as much as you can in the early days. Now, why do I promote skin to skin so much? It's because it has so many benefits. It helps you get started with breastfeeding. It helps your baby's temperature stabilization, and it helps them stabilize their blood sugar. They also cry less when they're doing skin to skin. And it has also been shown to help with brain development. Tip number 2, breastfeed early and breastfeed often. Frequent breastfeeding in the early days helps your baby lose less weight, have less problems with jaundice, helps your milk come in sooner, and helps you have an abundant milk supply long term. Tip number 3, learn your baby's feeding cues. These are the signs that your baby gives you that he or she wants to eat. They're referred to as feeding cues or hunger cues. They're the same thing. Now, one feeding cue is called rooting, and that's when if you touch your baby's cheek, they'll turn to that side. Also, if you touch their mouth, they'll open up. When your baby sucks on his hands, that's a feeding cue. If your baby sticks out his tongue, smacks his lips, those are all early feeding cues. Crying is considered a late feeding cue. Now, you want to try to avoid letting your baby get to the point where she's crying because she's hungry, because when a baby cries, they get disorganized and it can make it harder for them to latch on. So learn your baby's feeding cues and try to get them to the breast when you see those early feeding cues. And that was tip number 4, feed your baby when you see those early feeding cues. This is kind of a bonus tip. Avoid changing your baby's diaper if you can right before feeding, because most babies are going to cry during diaper changes, and then the baby's going to be in that disorganized state. So unless they have a messy diaper, just wait until after the first breast or after they're finished breastfeeding to change the diaper. The other thing is that feeding often will make a baby have a bowel movement. So if they're not dirty already, then you're going to have a better chance of not having to change so many diapers if you wait until either the middle or the end of the breastfeeding session to change their diaper. Tip number 5, get lots of rest, mama. Make naps a priority. Sleep when the baby sleeps. I know that sounds cliche, but it really will help you feel better. And some moms tell me, I'm not a napper, I can't nap. That's okay, you don't have to sleep, but try just laying down, closing your eyes, dark room, no phones, no iPads, nothing like that. A lot of moms have discovered when they're sleep deprived that they can in fact become a napper. Make sure your baby's healthcare provider is supportive of breastfeeding. In my breastfeeding resources library on my website, Breastfeeding Confidential, I have a pediatrician interview checklist. I'll put a link to that library down below. Now, you're probably not going to find a doctor or healthcare provider that says that they don't recommend breastfeeding. After all, it is recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Centers for Disease Control, the Surgeon General, to name a few. But you want to know specifically how they're going to help support your desire to breastfeed. Ask them just that. How are you going to support my plan to breastfeed? At what point would you recommend that I wean and switch to formula? Ask them if they have a lactation consultant that they can refer you to if you're having problems. If you ask those kinds of questions, you're going to have a better sense of whether or not this healthcare provider is truly supportive of breastfeeding. Which brings me to tip number 7. If you are having breastfeeding problems, get help sooner rather than later. Different places that you can find a lactation consultant, they may be available for outpatient visits at the hospital or birth center where you delivered. There are consultants that are in private practice. Some have offices where you go see them, and some might come to your home. I do virtual consults online if you don't have anybody nearby that you can see. Problems are easier to fix when they first start becoming a problem than if you let them go on for a period of time. So if you're struggling, please get help ASAP. Tip number 8, know how to have a good milk supply. I wrote an entire blog post on this, and I'll put a link to that below. What's important to know is that the early weeks are critical because that's when your body is trying to figure out how much milk to make. So you want to send it the right signals. You want to make sure that you're stimulating your breast regularly. That's going to be at least 8 times every 24-hour period in those first couple months. You're going to want to avoid getting engorged breasts for any extended period of time. That tells the breasts to stop making milk. And severe prolonged engorgement can destroy the milk-making cells. If your baby's not taking enough milk when your breasts first become engorged, make sure that you use a breast pump to relieve that pressure. Check out my engorgement video for more information on that. Which brings me to tip number 9. Don't worry about pumping if you don't have a reason to initially. I encourage you to spend the first few weeks just getting to know your baby, learning each other's signals and cues, and letting your baby drive your supply. When you get to the point where you're not thinking about all the details, that's a good time to introduce pumping into your routine. And when I say thinking about all the details, I mean things like you're not thinking about, is the baby positioned perfectly? Am I latching properly? You've done it so many times the right way that you know you're doing it right. You're not counting diapers because your baby has so many diapers, you know that she's getting plenty to eat. You're not having any nipple pain. When you're on autopilot, that's a good time to start thinking about adding pumping. Number 10 is a big one. Know the signs that your baby is getting enough to eat. Now, the only sure way to know is monitoring your baby's weight gain. However, there are signs that are reassuring. You want to look for 6 to 8 wet diapers every 24 hours. Just as important, maybe even more important, is that your baby be having 4 to 5 loose yellow runny stools every 24 hours in moderate quantity. So when I say moderate quantity, that's about how much I mean. Now sometimes they might just have a little bit, and it has to be at least the size of a quarter to count. If it's smaller than that, you don't even count it. And then there's going to be other times where they'll have a complete diaper blowout, up the front, up the back, out the sides. But basically, you just want to think that your baby has a lot of dirty diapers each day. Your baby should be eating at least 8 times every 24 hours in those first couple of months. You want to hear lots of swallowing during feedings. Now, swallowing is kind of a sound. It can be a real gentle sound, but it's kind of a like that. Now, the other thing you can do is watch for swallowing. And what you're watching for is where their chin drops down and they hold it for a beat during the suck. So it's like suck, suck, as opposed to suck, 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 suck. Another encouraging sign is if your breasts feel fuller before feedings and soften with the feeding. Now, there are a lot of myths about breastfeeding that can really derail you. And that's another video altogether. So I invite you to sign up for my Breastfeeding Myths course, Busting Breastfeeding Myths course. It's free, and I'll go ahead and put the link to that in the description below. If these breastfeeding tips were helpful to you, please give me a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you next time, Mama.